Watching the trailer for John Wick 3 and gauging the overall anticipation people have for this movie, it finally made me realize something. John Wick has risen to become one of the hottest franchises in town right now, which is kind of weird to say out loud considering where it came from. Firstly, it started out as an original spec script, and secondly, back when the trailer for the first movie was released, it didn't seem like anything special. It was more like, oh, it's another one of these straight to DVD movies. But then it came out and it was freaking awesome. And as to why this is, it basically can be boiled down to just two words: gun fu. In essence, gun fu is the new hot Hollywood action trope where you use firearms in close range combat as an extension of your body. Meaning, the same way you would use your fists and feet and knives in a fight, you use pistols and rifles and shotguns. And since gun fu has become the new hot thing, of course, the question in every Hollywood executive's mind is the same. How do you actually do gun fu in a movie? The answer to this question isn't too difficult. In fact, it's a very simple three-step process. Step 1, you hire a real proper choreographer who knows what they're doing. Step 2, you train your actors enough for them to look like they know what they're doing. Step 3, you film wider shots and longer takes to show that it's them doing it. Very straightforward, very obvious. A lot of movies in addition to John Wick have already figured this out. And so it's not really worth doing a video on. But what is worth doing a video on, I feel, is the question of how do you do gun fu that stands out? How do you plan and set up and film these firefight sequences in such a way that elevates the trope and makes it reach its full awesome-tastic potential, like this franchise very much has done? And so here we are. Let's take a look at the two first John Wick movies and their shootout sequences in order to hopefully discover some less obvious but highly significant qualities about them. If you're planning to make a movie with gun fu, get a real choreographer. But if you're planning to make a movie with gun fu that maximizes the effect of the gun fu, here's a few things to maybe keep in mind. The very first significant gun fu aspect you can learn from the very first John Wick movie is the sheer power in having a clear objective in form of a destination. To give some perspective on what I'm talking about, let's first briefly look at a firefight sequence that doesn't include what I'm talking about: the home shootout, where a bunch of intruders arrive to eliminate John Wick. To be clear, there's nothing really wrong with this sequence. It does, for example, properly feature the three-step process I mentioned. The choreography is great. Keanu Reeves looks like he knows what he's doing, and they show it. Overall, it's a powerful and fully functional close-range firefight sequence. But still, it just feels like it isn't as powerful as it could be. It feels like there's some tiny key component missing: a destination. Despite all the fancy fighting and gun work, John Wick in this sequence is pretty idle and passive. He doesn't have a goal, he doesn't have any crucial destination that he quickly has to get to. He's just slowly creeping through the house and steadily encountering these masked men and then putting them down. Again, it's cool, but it doesn't really pack a big enough of a punch. Compare this to what I believe to be the most powerful gun fu sequence in this movie: the club shootout. When you focus on the differences with the last sequence, there are some obvious things you can point out. You can point out the vibrant lighting, you can point out the energetic music, you can point out how this is more straight action, whereas the home sequence was more suspense. And while all of that is true, the biggest key difference that I see is the fact that this club sequence always has a clear destination. And not only a destination, but a destination with a sense of immediate urgency. The only reason John Wick is here is to take revenge on this douchebag bad guy who took away the last remaining connection he had with his dead wife. But in order to do that, he has to go through a small army of henchmen. And so this time, John Wick isn't fighting people just for the sake of fighting people, but instead to get to his destination before that destination gets away. This time, instead of being more passive and having all the time in the world, now it's all urgent. Now it's all go, go, go. And the result is gun fu moments like this. The power that felt lacking in the home shootout is very present here. In of itself, I think this club sequence is much easier to follow, because it's not just stuff happening, it's all very simple and for something. John Wick has to fight his way from point A to point B before point B gets away. To be honest, clear urgent goals are always crucial, no matter the movie. At the end of Mission Impossible Fallout, Ethan Hunt doesn't fight Walker only for the sake of fighting him, but because he has to stop the nuke before it goes off. But seeing as Gun Fu is all about movement and speed and close range action, this guideline is much more the case. Because regardless of what fancy moves your shootout sequence has, it's always that sense of immediate urgency that gives it that highly crucial feeling of intensity and power. Even before going back to see these films again, I always had that impression in the back of my head that the shootout sequences in John Wick Chapter 2 are stronger than in the first film. One reason for this could be the fact that the second movie is visually astounding. Plus, it pretty much always features some sort of urgent destinations in its firefights, whether it's escaping from somewhere or chasing after the bad guy or getting to the shotgun purposefully left behind. But the main reason, I think, is because the shootouts in Chapter 2 offer much more variety. Essentially, there's only ever really one gear in the shootout sequences of Chapter 1. John Wick goes and mows through a bunch of interchangeable Russian grunts. There's never really a moment where things escalate. There's never a moment where it feels like, oh, now things are getting dangerous. There are a couple tougher bad guys, but one of them isn't made to stand out enough, and the other all of a sudden just gets tossed aside. Mostly, the firefights throughout the whole movie are more or less the same thing, without a sense of progress. Even though these sequences are well made, they can get a bit stale after time, because it is the same thing over and over. And I'm pretty sure the filmmakers realized this, because in the sequel, they actually added in a couple different key things to keep it all more varied and fresh. One smaller thing they did was feature multiple different classes of enemies. Instead of Wick mowing down just interchangeable Russian grunts, now he mows down a few different factions of enemies. This is fine and does bring some variety, but alone it wouldn't be enough, because again, nationalities and whatever aside, it still is Wick mowing through a bunch of grunts. The real difference is made by adding in a couple bigger antagonists that seem like real threats to John Wick. We have Ruby Rose and we have Common. Neither of these characters gets too much development, but that's fine, because all the movie really needs to do is make them stand out enough to show the audience that, okay, these are people we need to watch out for. And when you use them to distinguish the groups of grunts from each other, that's when you begin finding that variety that the first movie was lacking. To give you an example, let's look at this sequence following the death of John Wick's target. We start out with high-class security, which is tougher than the Russian grunts from the beginning, but still fairly manageable. Then we suddenly have to face off with Ruby Rose's professional killers, which is a lot tougher and requires much more firepower. And if that wasn't enough, then we finally have to go one-on-one with Common. You see how throughout this one sequence, the stakes are constantly evolving. The danger is always escalating. There's always a sense of progress. And it's not just within this one sequence either. It's throughout the whole movie. In the next sequence, Wick has to take on a bunch of professional assassins, and then Common again when he's already at his weakest. Same with the final battle sequence. In video games, it's pretty fun to mow through big packs of smaller grunts, but at some point it's gonna get boring, which is why usually there are always some sort of mini-bosses and tougher types of enemies. Same mentality applies to gun fu films. I'm not saying you have to feature multiple different mini-bosses even if the story doesn't require it, but I am saying that there has to be a constant sense of progress and variety when it comes to the stakes. Instead of fighting the same interchangeable grunts over and over, there has to be something that switches things up. Tougher enemies, weaker own weaponry, whatever. Some form of ever-escalating danger. The last point I want to bring up is a point that I believe is probably the main reason for why John Wick has become this ever-celebrated face of gun fu. That point is the highly effective way the filmmakers have made him likable through pain. To give you some context, just recently I saw this John Woo movie Hard Boiled, which is one of the first movies that made the subgenre of gun fu famous. Overall, it's a cool film, but my main problem with it is that even though the filmmakers clearly base it in reality, it doesn't play by the rules of reality. Like, the main hero gets shot at more than a target at a gun range, and he gets hit maybe once or twice, and even then he just shrugs it off as nothing. Yeah, he's okay. The issue with this type of over-the-top action hero filmmaking is what I like to call the Superman dilemma. Meaning, when you make your hero so strong and so perfect to the point of pretty much being invincible, it very easily makes the hero unrelatable and the movie inaccessible. Why would I root for a hero if they're invincible? Why would I care or worry about a hero if they're invincible? The answer is, I wouldn't. John Wick, on the other hand, is the total opposite. When we first meet him, he's already dying on the street. When he's not too busy dying on the street, he's being beat up near death at his home, and then he wakes up to see his dead wife's last gift to him also dead. Same with the actual firefights. He's always getting hit, he's always hurt, he's always in pain. Overall, I'm pretty sure that John Wick in this movie spends more time in clothing that is covered in his blood than in clothing that isn't.
Good's your laundry?
I'm sorry to say that no one's that good.
The reason this method of abusing John Wick is so crucial is because it humanizes him. It makes him relatable. Because as we all know, reality is pain. And without it, I don't think these movies would ever work. Because in essence, they are about a man going around shooting and killing people, which isn't very admirable. And so, the fact that he is constantly punished for what he does, that's what makes us care and root for him. Even though John Wick is an expert marksman and a great gun fu wizard, he's still far from perfect. Things are very rarely going his way. He has to take time to catch his breath. He has to reload in the middle of the battle. He's suddenly running out of bullets and has to improvise. Everything he does is flawed and grounded in reality, even things that might at first seem far-fetched. A bulletproof suit might seem like a lot, but honestly, it's just an exaggerated movie version of your usual heavy-duty ballistic vest. It might stop bullets, but it still takes a toll and hurts like hell.
Zero penetration. However,
Quite painful, I'm afraid.
In this era of amazing, larger-than-life superheroes, the reason John Wick stands out is because he's not that. He's just a guy doing the best he can with what he has. And whoever the hero of your gun fu movie might be, they should embody the same essence. They should be flawed, they should be vulnerable. For every bullet that they give, they should get 2 bullets back. So, in closing, how exactly do you film gun fu? Is it by shooting cool gory headshots and having your hero wave their gun around sideways? Maybe so. But for me, real great gun fu sequences come from something else. First, give your hero an urgent destination that they have to reach right now. Then make them face increasingly difficult and dangerous enemies in order to reach it. And finally, have them be punished for doing it, only for them to get back up and keep pushing on anyway.